You may know, keynote speakers are very hard to find, and that's why we are so amazed to have not only Zaha here, but also our second keynote speaker, Tom Arrow. And Tom took the advice of starting every talk with a riddle very literally. He started even way before today, because even after he was recommended to us by very many sources, it was very much of a challenge to actually find his email address. So if you want to have something to do afterwards, just give it a try. It's very hard to find right now. That's why we're very lucky to have Tom here today, speaking as an engineer of the Wikimedia Deutschland, working on Wikibase Cloud and Wikibase in general. So Tom, thank you for being here. The stage is yours for your talk on Wikibase Federation and the future.
Thank you very much, Tim. Yeah, so today I'm going to give you a little bit of an insight into Wikibase. I wasn't exactly sure where to pitch this talk because I think there's a very wide range of experiences with Wikibase at this conference. Some people here are obviously very, very into the space, have a huge amount of knowledge about it, and I think some people probably know very little. So I'm going to try and make this a relatively approachable talk, starting from the biggest Wikibase that's out there at the moment, Wikidata, and understanding how the data is stored there and how it's used, and then looking at Wikibases, and then looking at this concept of federation, which is a very trendy topic at the moment. I genuinely did take Tim's advice. I think it is solid advice because, as I said, it's going to start relatively slowly for Wikibase pros, and hopefully things will build up. So if you find at the beginning of the talk that you're a bit bored, you could work on this puzzle. So if you have your laptop out or something and trying to hack your way through this, I think the way to solve this puzzle that I dreamt up last night is probably by doing some kind of federated work and looking across various sources of data to figure out how this all plugs together. I'll just give you a couple of moments to try and get the puzzle stored in your head. In case you want to attempt it, the answer is coming at the end. There we are. Right. Thank you very much for the introduction, Tim, but I thought I could basically repeat it in case you want to. I'm Tom. Everyone calls me Tom. I work for Wikimedia Germany. I've worked there for quite a while now. And technically my job title is staff software engineer, so I sit around writing code and trying to help other people write code during the day. And the team that I work on is the Wikibase Cloud team. So we have a few different teams inside Wikimedia Germany in this sort of LOD space. LOD in this case stands for Linked Open Data. And I work on this product that I will come and talk to you about in a couple of slides' time. Also, there's my email address. So it's very handy, and it's even QR codeable to make this really super obvious for people who want to be able to get hold of it. Yeah, otherwise apparently Googling me is pretty hard, which I'm surprised about. I think it's also fair to the people who have sent me here to give you a little bit of an idea about Wikimedia Germany. Probably you know about them. We're the largest chapter of the global Wikimedia movement. We do lots of the things that you would expect from that, but what's quite unique about us versus a lot of other chapters in the movement is we actually have a software development department, and they're working on Wikibase and Wikidata as well as other things. But working on Wikibase and Wikidata is quite core to the plan we have to develop over the next, well, it's been for a very long time, but definitely the next year, next 3 years, whatever, we see it as very important to the work we're doing. And maybe you have no idea what Wikibase is. I think probably you've heard the name in 4 or 5 different talks already, but a lot of those didn't have a very basic introduction to Wikibase, and maybe that's fine for most of you, but I imagine there's probably somebody sat there who's been thinking, I don't really know what everyone's talking about. So here's a really very bullet pointy summary, and I'll go through to showing it a bit more practically in a second. It's an extension of MediaWiki, but it's not really just an extension of MediaWiki, really. It's also some associated services. For it to be useful generally, you need these other services around it. to make it easy to ask questions of the data, to be able to view that data, and to do other things. Like some of the other knowledge management MediaWiki extensions people have talked about here, it's very flexible. It allows users to design the data scheme, sort of the schema for the data, and to even argue about it and to work on it. That's quite important. And it's also thinking very hard about how to connect these data sets to other sources. And it's also quite convenient to edit or read with machines, which is very nice, and is a thing that obviously is going to become increasingly more important after things like the talk you just saw, or 2 talks ago. Doing things like using AI to edit data. This is probably going to be more successful if you're trying to put some kind of structure on it and things. And we do community-based software development and stuff. Before I come on to the nitty-gritty of what Wikibase is, I wanted to give you a flavor of all the different Wikibases that are out there. Here's just some of them, and I'm going to go into a few more in detail, but there are plenty of people on the internet, from independent single persons sat around in a basement to galleries, libraries, archives, museums who are now exposing their data sets using Wikibase and trying to connect them to other data sets. And here's just a couple of samples of those. Which brings me on to trying to give you an introduction to Wikibase via the best known Wikibase, which is Wikidata. This is the first one out there. And today, exactly today, is Wikidata's 13th birthday. So yeah, woo, it's the 13th birthday. Yeah. And it wouldn't be a birthday without cake. So I did sneak out at lunch and obtained a cake. So I'm going to disappear from the mics for a second and bring a cake back on. So I'm not actually quite sure where the video feed stretches to, but I'm going to put a cake on the table. This is a little bit dangerous to be like wandering around with a cake.
This is not my favorite talk.
There's a high So there you are. There's a cake. It's a relatively small cake, but I think probably looking at the size of the room, we should be able to slice it up. So that's going to be available downstairs at the end of the talk as a sort of like birthday present. I'm going to just leave it there as a thing for me to knock over partway through the rest of the talk. But yeah, so it's the 13th birthday of Wikidata, and obviously that means there's been a lot of things that have happened since then. But for you to kind of understand that story, you probably need to know what is Wikidata. And what I'm going to be doing throughout this talk is tabbing a little bit in and out and giving you some live-ish demos. And like some other people, I've already prayed to the demo gods that the internet's not going to fail me. But if it does, then hopefully there's a couple of backups here. Yeah, so here's the landing page of Wikidata. It's a MediaWiki. It's one of the major products one of the major projects that is hosted by the Wikimedia Foundation for the Wikimedia communities. And to give you an idea of what data looks like in it, I wanted to show you this item about Leibniz. Let's see if I can make this big enough for you to actually be able to see everything. What you can see is that you have items, which are wiki pages, and they contain multilingual information about just the name of concepts, but also statements which allow you to connect them to other concepts. So you can see here, for example, you can have a statement which says Leibniz was a human. And you can also see, you can take pictures from places, like in this case, there's a picture here coming from Wikimedia Commons. Now, the way that this item is constructed and where the statements on this item are constructed, some of these statements actually target other items in the Wikibase. So you can see, here's an item about humans. Hopefully this is like not super complicated and relatively easy to understand, but that's the general picture of how Wikibases look. So they have items, they have statements on those items, they connect to one another to be able to structure their information. Now, I talked about Wikidata, but as immediately happened, I think probably for most people in this room, once you saw the concept of wikis being used by other people, probably most people here thought, oh, I want my own wiki, right? Like, oh, I want to host my own for some reason. And to that end, Wikimedia Germany has been trying to support this almost since day zero or whatever of Wikidata coming out by making sure that this extension and the things around it could be at least partly reused by other people. And the first product I'm going to tell you a little bit about is Wikibase Suite. And this is our kind of self-hosted product. And by product, I use this term in the sense of not in a commercial sense, I guess it's important to keep in mind. Yeah, it's a way to relatively easily deploy not just the MediaWiki extension, but the components that are around it so that you'll be able to kind of have a relatively fully featured experience. Let me give you an example of one of these self-hosted Wikibases that you might be interested in going and looking up after this, because there is a huge amount of like interesting but quite niche data buried away in Wikibases now. So this is enslaved.org, who are running a really interesting project about people related to the slave trade, both enslaved people and people who owned slaves. And yeah, it's very, very fine-grained in the sense that it has information about individual, otherwise probably non-notable people. It's perhaps not the sort of thing you would expect to see on a generic encyclopedia like Wikidata, but still very important, and it's a really useful data set for researchers to have and for people to be able to investigate and do all sorts of things with. I wanted to give you a quick idea of what Wikibases are out there that are hosted by people. This is sort of the backup slide, which I will tab over to the live one in a second. This is a chart which shows in descending order the largest Wikibases that are self-hosted. You can scan the QR code to get there, or you can have a little look at me navigating there. Here? I hope this is large enough. So you can see that the size of these Wikibases varies pretty dramatically from a few hundred thousand, well, not a few hundred thousand, a few hundred million triples, and dropping very rapidly down to millions of triples, and then under the million triple bit before you get to the kind of 8,000. Is this large enough for people at the back to see? Can you kind of see back there? Yeah, great. Yes, so that's the kind of scope of some of the self-hosted Wikibases. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about the thing that's my kind of neck of the woods. So we also have another product, which is Wikibase Cloud. This is a quick and easy way to have a Wikibase because we think that generally having Wikibases is pretty complicated, and it would be convenient to have one that just works with some restrictions, but without a huge amount of difficulty to set up. It's basically, I guess you could think of it like another wiki farm. Like maybe you recognize some of these logos. You've got Mira who's there, you've got ShoutWiki, you've got Fandom, you've got people like this who are basically offering hosted solutions for MediaWiki, but our kind of take on it is specifically about hosting Wikibases, and we're specifically looking for people who want to expose structured data to the world under an open license, and people who are kind of a good fit for this this space, because it's a free platform that's run by Wikimedia Germany, yeah, that's kind of the point behind this thing. I just want to give you a very quick idea of how you might use this. This is obviously a dummy instance for you, but yeah, the idea behind it is super low barrier to entry, right? So if you want to make a new site about MudCon, a new Wikibase about MudCon, you can go ahead and make a MudCon. Is this also big enough at the back? Probably it's a little small. I'll just make it slightly larger. And you can make an account, and then you are asked to try and explain how your Wikibase is going to maybe be useful in order to help us figure out if it's kind of in the scope of being hosted by us. And then almost immediately, you've got a Wikibase. You get through some bot filtering, and there you are. Like, now you have a Wikibase ready to go. And this is something I'm going to come on to in a bit, but it's like a key part, I think, of our vision of having more federated data, is it being a relatively low barrier to entry to get a Wikibase to add content to. Because if the step of running your own Wikibase is hard, then it's unlikely that there's going to be a huge number of people who are able to go ahead and do it. And this site is like live online on a staging site, so you could, in theory, go to mudcon.wikibase.dev and find it now. Yes, so that's kind of the quick idea behind what Wikibase Cloud is. But I wanted to tell you a bit about the fact that it's different from some of those other wiki farms, and it's probably quite different from the experience some of you have of running your own like enterprise-y type media or media wikis for enterprises, in that we wanted to make this barrier to entry super low. You saw that. But on the other side of it, we also need to keep the marginal cost of each Wikibase super low. So we've done quite a few things to try and like keep the costs down, so that we can have many of these without breaking the metaphorical bank, since we're funded by donations and haven't got unlimited money. I showed you the nice chart of the self-hosted Wikibases. Here's a chart of some of the ones on Wikibase Cloud. You can see here there are about 1,000 when I looked last week, active Wikibases, and there's more that are kind of stale and old. Active is a pretty loose definition here. Oh, sorry, no, not active, like with content in, not necessarily being regularly edited, but with content in. Yeah, they again scale from relatively large to relatively small. There's again a helpful QR code for you here if you wish to like go and explore some Wikibase clouds because you're getting bored of me talking. Here's an example of one which I thought was quite interesting. It's a museum that wants to share its data about its artifacts. I don't actually know the details of what life is like in this museum, but I'm assuming they probably don't have a Wikibase expert in-house who could host and run this thing. So it's very convenient for them to be able to just spin one up and start sharing their data. And it's convenient for people who then want to access that data to be able to just get hold of it. And another example of people who are using this is the National Library of Nigeria, who want to use this for their like authority type files, this kind of thing. Maybe some of you library people know about that. Yeah, again, it's a relatively low barrier to entry for them. It's quite a convenient way for them to get started. So, told you loads of things about Wikibases and Wikidata, but I'm a third of the way into the talk now, and I didn't tell you anything about federation. I just told you that we've got loads of Wikibases dotted all around, and I told you we've got this big famous Wikibase in the middle, Wikidata, that's been sat there for quite a while, 13 years, accumulating data, and now you might ask, well, so what, Tom? And the answer is, it's interesting to be able to connect all of these things together. Not just connecting Wikidata to Wikibases, but connecting Wikidata to the other Wikimedia projects, connecting Wikidata to other bits of the linked open data web, and also connecting those Wikibases themselves to the other bits of the linked open data web. I think many people have reused this like very nice graphic. I managed to internally get hold of a still, I think, not quite perfect new version of it with the shiny new Wikibase logo, because you might not know, but we updated this logo like 3 years ago. It's very hard to sell this new logo to people, but I'm trying to sell it here, and we're totally going to like redo this eventually so it looks nice and shiny. But I'm just going to talk you through like some of these ways in which data can be connected together, and I think this term federation is quite loaded, so I'm going to, in the end, really focus on federation between Wikibases, but I want to tell you a little bit about some of the other types of federation just before I get there. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is really what I think of the first kind of instance of Wikibase to Wikibase federation, which is structured data on commons. So maybe you know about Wikimedia Commons. It's a big another MediaWiki instance run by the foundation that, instead of focusing on storing data, stores media files, and there's lots of them. Here's like nice, beautiful pictures from sugar cubes, and they initially were really just described by Wikitext. And it's obviously convenient to be able to describe them in more detailed ways. So there was this concept called structured data on commons, and what you can see here is structured data about that picture. Specifically, what you can see you see my cursor? Yeah, you can, brilliant, is the sugar cube depiction line here. And this is not just some random thing written in by a human. This is semantically linked to the Wikidata item about sugar cubes. And I think this is probably like where federation between Wikibases really kind of kicked off. It's only possible to do because Commons and Wikidata are running kind of on the same servers in the same data center, and the way that this was designed was possible because of that. But yeah, it's reusing the concept of sugar cubes from Wikidata on another Wikibase. And in this case, yeah, Commons was kind of like made to be a bit of a Wikibase for this. So that, I think, is a very like early example of this, which then people tried to follow up in a few different ways. So now I'm going to talk to you about the current state of the art of federation between Wikibases, and then I will tell you a little bit more about where we're going to go in the future, in both the near and probably the more distant future. So imagine you have one Wikibase that you want to store a load of different content in, and you have this all packed together without it being spread apart between Wikibases. I kind of drew you this diagram, and you can see there's all sorts of different types of information all mixed up together here. And I tried to highlight that with these inner circles, which show you the, I guess, topic areas that these might be about. And you could imagine that on a single Wikibase, you might imagine this could even be Wikidata. They don't necessarily make that much sense to be sat next to each other. And that could be kind of a problem for a number of different reasons. Because probably my aunt, unless she's super notable, probably shouldn't be on Wikidata for a variety of reasons, right? Like maybe my aunt doesn't want to be on Wikidata, and therefore the people who are worried about that kind of thing and are looking after Wikidata's way it represents living people are going to try and remove it from Wikidata, but also because if everyone puts their aunt on Wikidata, Wikidata will overflow, right? Like there's just too much stuff there. And the same thing is maybe true with still more generic information, but still very specific information. I think storing each composer's favorite scale, this is, for a start, like a relatively subjective rather than objective thing, and pretty hard to find decent source data for that Mozart's favorite scale really was C-sharp minor. So it probably doesn't make sense to all be stuck in this one Wikibase, but there are some concepts that are shared between these two weird topics, like, for example, being able to store the information that my aunt was born in Salzburg, or my cousin was born in Paris, and Mozart was born in Salzburg. And in this case, these blue and green boxes are representing items and properties, which you hope kind of remember from the earlier slides where I was showing you that this is how data is structured in a Wikibase. And you then have some sort of more even really generic encyclopedic information that probably is pretty unchangeable and is useful to everybody, like the fact that Paris is in France or Salzburg is in Austria. So now I'm going to jump you forward to a kind of futuristic world, which we aren't at yet, and show you what things could look like if you were to split this apart. So you could imagine splitting this into separate Wikibases run by different people, right? You could imagine I run my own private family Wikibase, and someone else with a load of other contributors runs their own composer's Wikibase, and they want to be able to store their specific data in their own Wikibase, but they manage to reuse the common concepts when they want to. So, for example, probably not every Wikibase wants to recreate the concept of Mozart, or the concept of being born somewhere. But Wikidata probably shouldn't have information about my aunt in it, and this Wikibase about composers probably shouldn't have that either. I guess I maybe glossed over a bit why it's undesirable to put all this data in Wikidata. Maybe it was really clear with my aunt, but perhaps it wasn't super clear why it might be undesirable to put composers' data in Wikibase. I think generic data in Wikidata, I think generic data about it might be quite sensible to have. For example, that Mozart was a composer, it's very good. But you hit a number of limits that aren't only technical, but also social limits if you just try and ram all of the information in one MediaWiki. You've probably seen this around the MediaWikis that you run as well. If you have an organization, you maybe even end up wanting to run 2 different MediaWikis for that organization for different departments, or maybe you end up wanting to split this up because socially it becomes impossible using MediaWiki to kind of curate that data at such a large scale. And you can imagine it could be very hard for people to come to some consensus on what the meaning of place of birth is if they're all kind of using place of birth in slightly different ways. So by splitting the data up, you also kind of start to tackle this social problem, because I think fundamentally the reason that wikis work is because they drive towards consensus on their wiki. And in some cases, it's not possible to drive towards consensus. So you kind of need to both drive towards it in certain spaces and allow flexibility in others. This is, I think, why we end up having things like multiple languages for different wikis, because in some cultures, it makes sense to have an article about Bonnie and Clyde, and in some cultures, it makes sense to have an article about Bonnie and Clyde, who are like a famous crime duo. So you can imagine this is like a thing that could be quite helpful. And particularly, it's also helpful for the nerds who are running Wikidata, because as well as the social problems, there are some like serious technical problems with wedging loads and loads of data in Wikidata. So if we can find a way to solve that by spreading it out and reducing the load and making this scale in lots of different ways a bit more horizontally, then that's a really desirable situation for us to be in. Now, what we've kind of done at Wikimedia Germany is try and break up this topic of Wikibase federation into a couple of different facets. And the way that we split it up internally, and therefore the way you're going to hear about, is thinking about ontology federation and query federation. So ontology federation is about being able to distribute data across different Wikibases, which is kind of what you saw here in this slide, right? I've split my aunt out from this big pool in the middle. You can't see it on the screen, can you, if I do that? This big pool in the middle, and I've pulled it over into my Wikibase. But I've also reduced some duplication there because I've not copied in this place of birth item to my family Wikibase, and I've not copied this Paris item into my family Wikibase. So that's this kind of ontology federation concept. And if you're able to split this data up between Wikibases, that's kind of great and cool and everything, right? But unless you're going to click through from each Wikibase, you also need to be able to ask questions across those Wikibases to get sensible answers. Like, give me all of my family members who were born in France, is a question that if you were only able to ask questions across this family Wikibase, you wouldn't be able to do. So the other half of this puzzle that we're trying to think about is query federation, how it's best to enable users to ask questions across multiple Wikibases, given that they've then given the precursor condition that they've already managed to find some way to spread this ontology, this like definition of things across Wikibases. So here you can see how we've kind of defined some terms, which is, ontology federation is all about data modeling. So ontology federation is about figuring out how to structure your data so that it can be spread across Wikibases, and also so it can be spread across Wikibases in a way that gives you, as the person who's modeling their data, the way to copy across the information that you want to kind of copy and share, and not copy that which you don't. It sounds a bit vague, right? But you could imagine a world in which, going back to this diagram, you might want to store in a different way the place of birth for Mozart, instead of saying it was in Salzburg in Austria, I actually don't know in detail what the precise historic situation was for the country that Salzburg was in back when Mozart was born. But going back to our debate on the first day, it's basically you could imagine another group of people who want to model this data in a different way, right? So you don't want to always be forced to copy across all the data. Maybe in your little Wikibase you're really excited about being able to in a detailed way describe what the states were like when people were born in them rather than what it would be like now. Does that make sense? Coming back to this big discussion about the president of Montenegro. And once you've done this, you can then do some queries across Wikibases. And I'm still in this bit where I'm telling you about what the state of the art is right now. People are doing this, probably people in this room are doing it, but it was, and this is kind of how Wikidata was originally conceived, was that this would be possible to do. And when people thought about doing queries, this was definitely high up on the priority list, but it wasn't always well known, and still the interface for doing it is pretty complicated, but I'm just going to give you a little flavor of it. So this is an example of a query across Wikibases. You can click the link and it will take you to the doc article about it, and spoiler for the puzzle, this doesn't answer the puzzle for you, but this has some hint towards how you could construct some queries to answer your puzzle. So if you're playing along in the back, then maybe this is going to speed up your getting to the answer. We're going to have a really quick look at what this query looks like. And what you can see here is probably something very zoomed out. This is the query that was on the slide. And then what I've done here for you is execute it. And what's kind of magical about this is Wikibase run by an institution who, I hope I'm getting this right, is really interested in storing information about historic French literature and the content of that literature. Pretty niche, but obviously really important to them, and so therefore something that wouldn't really make sense to go into the main bit of Wikidata, but they also probably don't want to copy and maintain all of this generic geographic information about where cities or countries are. So what you can see here is this query is combining detailed information about books and their place with the geographic information that's coming from Wikidata. If we keep clicking into this, we're going to eventually get to a point, and we can see that this is an article about a book that was placed somewhere because it's associated with a place on Wikidata that has coordinates, so you can see it on a map. And you can imagine that this group of exceedingly knowledgeable about French literature team probably don't know a huge amount about coordinate locations, and they certainly don't want to be maintaining this over time, right? They don't, when it turns out that actually they didn't really put the center of France in the center of France, or this city changed name or something, they don't want to have to maintain this. So being able to spread this across different Wikibases is very convenient for them. And this is done right now. You could read about it in this nice article. And it's possible to do because of how they've structured their data. They've managed to find a way to do this without really using any convenient functionality built into Wikibase. They've done it by just using that same concept of properties and items and constructing careful properties so that they're able to connect one to another. So what they've done in this case, and I've simplified it here using our nice Composer example, is they've got an item in their Composer Wikibase that references the item in Wikidata and says it's the same as this. And also, actually, this is a bidirectional link. So this is in the literature case, maybe not in my fictional Composer's Wikibase case, often on Wikidata they will say this is the same concept described in this other Wikibase on Wikidata. And that means that they're able to run queries that go backwards and forwards like we just saw. And it just wanted to give you a flavor of what this looks like. I showed you what the statements look like. So you have an exact match to Wikidata on your article about some author in some French Enlightenment novel, and you have a link to the French Enlightenment Wikibase on Wikidata. And you can see even here, right, this has allowed them to have some flexibility about how they want to describe their items. On Wikidata, they want to describe this author as just Granville, and actor as Granville, and in Memotext, they want to describe it in some other way. So it gives you this flexibility. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about a concept that kind of died, right? This is a thing we tried. It's a thing we tried like 4 years ago and never really took off very well, which is this federated properties idea. So we had the idea we could bake into the Wikibase software the chance to reuse properties from Wikidata. So you could reuse, for example, your place of birth concept from Wikidata. You could say, my cousin was born in my house. That's a bit of a contrived example, right? But we didn't really manage to get this thing off the ground. I think it wasn't really very well shipped as a product because of all sorts of complicated reasons about like convincing people to use features and making them good enough before people use them. But this is like historic state of the art. And so I want to tell you a bit about where we're going in the future, because that was kind of a like failed experiment from like 2022 or something, and then everything went a bit quiet, and you're probably wondering what we're doing now about this. So the next thing we're going to be thinking about in the very short term is this idea of federated values. So we'll go back to look at what federated properties was. This was reusing the kind of place of birth concept here from Wikidata, not about reusing either my house or my cousin. And in the Mozart case, this would be about reusing, again, the place of birth concept, not about reusing the Mozart concept. So yeah, we have probably got the plan to enable users to create statements where they are going to target the values in Wikidata. And I want to be super clear here. This isn't going to be a like definite production feature. This is a thing we're going to build as a prototype, see if it sticks. I think this is a very interesting thing to think about because although we assumed everyone would want to reuse properties, it seems like actually having talked to people, most people want to reuse items. And so everyone wants to reuse the concept of Paris, but not everyone really wants to reuse the concept of born in some place. And someone very kindly shipped me, my colleague over there who's the product manager for building this beta feature, very kindly shipped me some mock-ups, which I thought I would show off to you. So yeah, you could imagine a world in which you edit items on Wikidata, and normally you have this drop-down thing, and this is a zoomed-in section here, where you now can find, I'm not quite sure how there's the G missing here, because you'll see it's there in the next slide once you've saved it, on Wikidata. And that's probably what's happening in the very near horizon. What I drew for you originally, though, as like, I think a realistic vision of the future, a bit further out, is not simply being able to do federated properties and federated values, but probably complete federated statements. So in this case, that would be maybe reusing any part of that relationship, or maybe not any part of it, but both the property and the target of that relationship could maybe be reused from another Wikibase. It doesn't have to be Wikidata as well. I'm just using Wikidata here as an example. So you can see these different types of dashed line. And what you can imagine is that the shorter dashed line is kind of maybe representing this federated properties relationship that kind of died, but maybe will be a thing that's revived and used in the future. And this longer dashed line would be the federated values kind of idea. So you could imagine putting these two things together and maybe ending up with federated statements. So you could write completely kind of remote data on your Wikibase. And this is what you could imagine it looks like after some federation. I think there's still a few interesting little things to tell you about, which I think are important in the context of federation, and probably important in the context of people running other MediaWikis who might be interested in getting content from other MediaWikis. Because I think in general this concept isn't really that unique to Wikibase, and I wanted to tell people here who are coming without any interest in Wikibase, why maybe this talk is still a little bit interesting to them. And I think the first challenge is discovering where you could get data from. I think this discovery problem is still there in lots of federated systems. And one example of this that I think is working quite well at the moment for Wikibase Cloud is, that's hosted on Wikibase Cloud and is working in general for Wikibases, but not arbitrary MediaWikis, is wikibase.world. So this is a Wikibase of Wikibases where there is a community there who are regularly scraping different Wikibases, seeing how they're connected together, figuring out which Wikibases are related to one another with which of these items that are the same, and they're kind of building this space where you can figure out how to connect your wikis together. And I think what's also powerful about this is by not being a centralized solution and it being free for new pools of wikis to be added to this by simply signing up on the wiki and making a bot account and building a bot that goes and does some other type of scraping. I think this is a very flexible approach and one that's going to hopefully start addressing that discovery problem. And I think another example of this that maybe people here would be interested in reviving, not just for Wikibase, but for MediaWikis in general. I talked to Cindy about it yesterday. It was this the Wiki apiary thing, which I think could be another interesting thing to dig out of the. I think it's not an idea that should be thrown away, right? Basically being able to discover how MediaWikis could be connected to one another could be super useful. Not just because you want to share this already nice structured data, but maybe because you actually want to more efficiently suggest to users, oh, your article on this MediaWiki could be linked to an article on another MediaWiki using some fancy AI feature. I don't know, something like this. And there's also this Wikibase metadata thing I showed you the slides of before. It's another discovery tool you could use to find Wikibases that might meet your needs. A couple of challenges as well as discovering Wikibases is you can struggle a bit with different versions. And I put this slide in here because I figure this is a common thing that people in this area, in this room probably have faced, right? You probably hate juggling mismatches of compatible stuff between a long-term support release and a minor release of some extension versus the upstream thing from core. And this is always really messy when you're just running it on your computer or on your server. But if you think about how this federation thing might work for Wikibases and maybe would even work between MediaWikis, it's super complicated as well because you suddenly discover one Wikibase has this language and the other one doesn't have this language, and this one has this version of this API and this one doesn't, and actually there's not that much stability out there between MediaWiki versions, and there's not a huge amount of homogeneity there as well. Probably you've all seen this. Probably some of you are running out of security dated MediaWikis, probably. No one really wants to admit it, right? But probably people are, and they're definitely probably running the last LTS release, and there's probably features and bots and things that now wouldn't work on that people would like to be able to use. An example of this that we faced trying to get this federation kind of concept running on our kind of connections between Wikibase Cloud Wikis and Wikidata that immediately jumped out to us was we don't support the Wikibase REST API on cloud yet. That's a thing we haven't got to doing because we haven't done a MediaWiki update, and this is a classic kind of problem of connecting data together is if you have version mismatches between the software that's running in these different places, and that's almost it has to be baked into your thinking about building the system because you're always going to end up with this version drift if you're not in control of all of the actors in this. There's going to be people who are slower to update, and there's going to be people who want to run bleeding edge code. Yeah, so there you are. That's the I think definitely not set in stone, but the general organizational vision for what federation is likely to look like in the next 1 to 2 and a bit years' time from Wikimedia Germany. But I wanted to cut myself a minute or two to talk about non-Wikimedia Germany thought about things, because I think there's probably lots of interesting parallels you can draw to other federated systems here that I would like to draw your attention to. And I think the main thing that you could imagine a model of federation between Wikibases would look like maybe would end up looking a bit similar to how federation is working between the classic thing everyone sees when they Google the word federated, right? Which is how Mastodon and these kind of activity pub things are working. I think you could imagine a world in which you subscribe to changes from some bits of a wiki but not others, because you trust this or you trust these actors and you trust all the actors on one Wikibase but not on another. And I think that's kind of the very distant future would be a lot more fine-grained control over what you want to pull from different places and how you want to represent it. There you are. There's your answer to the question. It was Voltaire. I don't know if anyone put the time and effort into digging it up. I'd like to thank a couple of people who flicked through these slides and supported some of the content I wrote in them. But yeah, as I say, all these errors that probably you've noticed and hopefully taken a photo of, so you can wave them at me in a second, are mine. And I'm imagining, since I'm at 45 minutes now, maybe some people have some questions about the talk.
Great. Thank you so much, Tom. Questions? Okay. Who was faster? I don't know. Okay, we start here.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question about your future plans. You said you wanted to provide the values. Is it in the context of a controlled vocabulary? I have my own instance and a field, and I want to show, or the user can select from a set of values, which is a connection to a certain property on the Wikibase?
I think, if I'm understanding the question correctly, not exactly. I'm going to flick back to this, if I can get there, this one, yeah. I think not exactly. It's not so much about controlling the vocabulary as about, so it wouldn't be about restricting user choice. I think, in general, the way Wikibase has always been designed is that we almost let the user write whatever they like, and then post that event we might flag up to them that this is violating some controlled setup. I don't know, for example, it's unreasonable to have a death date if you don't have a birth date or something like this. Or I'm trying to think of a good example of a strictly controlled vocabulary. But I don't think it's quite the same thing. This is about reusing concepts and whether or not that concept is a real item or it's just a relationship from another place. Does that make sense or not really? Feel free to grab the mic back and tell me that doesn't make sense. I reckon it doesn't make sense, so go and ask it.
Okay, I think we go with Floria next, and you guys can think
Okay.
a little bit more
Yeah, okay.
talk at dinner.
Yeah. Thank you for your very interesting talk, and I think it also mentioned a lot of things I had in my talk in the morning today. I have one question, because this slide here is quite nice, because Wikidata in this case is in the middle. It's always normally in my federated queries as well. Because normally I'll just say, okay, this kind of global thing I would store in Wikidata, and all of the more detailed things that would store in the other Wikibases around that, maybe also share with that kind of concepts here. But the big thing, as you said before, as I've done as well, is to link the identifiers to each other. In your own Wikibase, it's totally fine. You can use the, as showed before, external link or create an ID, whatever thing. In Wikidata, it's a bit more complicated, because the cool thing is that this property creation is run by the community and the decision of the community. So it's also for me the thing. Currently, all of my things were linked to my own linked data and triple stores or Wikibases are just currently done with the external identifier item in Wikidata, because I don't know if I could convince the community to accept my property that my ID is relevant enough.
Sure.
What means if the community says no, federation is gone. Or should I use just the external property in the case that the community just say no, your in this case maybe Wikibase at or on wikibase.cloud is not relevant enough for an identifier in Wikidata. How to deal with that kind of issue?
Yeah, so I don't think it's a problem. I think it is convenient for people writing those Sparkle queries if you have a bidirectional connection between the two. But I think you can have a one-directional connection and everything still works perfectly fine. I think you can just have, I'm not sure I followed exactly the terminology used, but you can have a property on your Wikibase, Florian's Wikibase over here, that says this concept is the same as that concept on Wikidata, and Wikidata doesn't have to have any agreement with this. I guess the problem might be with how you then construct the queries to ask about it, but I don't think it's impossible. I think if we look at maybe we don't want to fall into it now, we should look at it afterwards, it's a bit detailed, but if you look at that Memotext one, I think that Memotext query doesn't rely at all on Wikidata caring about Memotext. It merely relies on Memotext caring about Wikidata. Yeah.
Okay, but maybe keep it short because it's a very niche discussion.
Yes.
Just one short remark. Yeah, technically I think it's possible. That the thing is that normally you just have my linked data, whatever, as some kind of a primary database, and Wikidata is a secondary thing, and in this case the bidirectional links are very important to link back to the original data. Sometimes it's not really happening, but it's a discussion for having by the beer. So
yeah, sounds good.
Great, thanks. And we have one more question from Bernhard.
Yes, thank you a lot for your great presentation. I think there is one more aspect about federation that we should talk about, maybe not now, but during the course of the conference maybe. We have crawled the internet on openly available MediaWiki installations, and there are roughly 1,000 semantic MediaWiki installations. Some might have obscure data about my cousin or your cousin. Some might have very well curated data, research data. So maybe we should talk about how we could federate queries, not queries or ontologies with semantic MediaWiki, because I think there's a lot of potential there. For Wikidata, but also for other Wikibases that might want to link to a semantic MediaWiki out there and the other way around. So I think that would be an important topic, and it would perfectly align to the Foundation's goal of sharing the sum of our knowledge, because some of the knowledge is still and will be curated in semantic MediaWiki. So I think that would be an interesting discussion maybe over lunch.
Yeah, I think it would be.
Over dinner.
I think in general, I try to be a bit cheeky, right, and narrow the scope of the talk down to something that would fit in 45 minutes about Wikibase to Wikibase Federation. But in general, yeah, I think the whole point of the kind of linked open data web is that, and I don't really fully understand exactly how semantic MediaWiki works, so someone's going to have to teach me about it, but it's still very happy to spit out RDF, and you can stick the RDF somewhere. And if you can stick the RDF somewhere that you can query, then it's exactly the same process. But it does still kind of come with that prerequisite of ontology federation, I think. I.e., somebody somewhere needs to say, hey, this concept on my semantic MediaWiki is somehow connected to the rest of the graph, right? It doesn't have to be via Wikidata. It could be via some other resource, but you do have to have some connection there in order to be able to make meaningful queries. And I think, yeah, maybe building some kind of standard way to do that would then make people more willing to do it. I think that's a good idea. I don't know what that would look like, not least because I don't really know what the RDF that comes out of semantic MediaWiki looks like, and how well, how homogeneous it is, not how well structured it is, but how homogeneous it is, and therefore how easy it is to do. But yeah, it sounds super interesting. And I think I didn't really talk about it a huge amount in this presentation either for time reasons, but improving the experience of users doing these federated queries is also really important to Wikimedia Germany. It's something we're also hoping to look at in that same kind of time window. So making it easier to construct those queries, because I'm not going to jump back in slides to it, but it was like pretty complicated, right? Like there were a million lines of Sparkle and the service lines and blah, 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 very complicated. It's also kind of hard to know even, can you talk to Florian's wiki, or do you have to go to Florian's wiki and go from Florian's wiki to Wikidata? Like this is also a bit of a space that we think there's a huge amount of user experience stuff to be improved upon. And I think you could do the same thing with other LOD resources, whether or not that's a triple store that's filled with content from Semantic MediaWiki, or just some other triple store from a government agency that ships out mapping triples or whatever. Like, I think there's also a possibility to really improve that experience. I think, if I can steal another 30 seconds though, one of the prime motivators for the work that we're doing is trying to take into account, not just this, but trying to take into account the amount of strain that's on Wikidata at the moment. And so trying to make sure that we are not necessarily evicting people from Wikidata, I don't think that's the impression we want to give, but trying to make sure that we're building a realistic alternative home for data that otherwise people would think needs to go into Wikidata is a big part of the work that we're going to be focusing on in the near future. So yeah, connecting to Semantic MediaWiki is great from the very high level like mission goal, right, of connecting to some of all knowledge, but it's maybe a little bit further in our like focus window, I guess, because we're probably a bit more worried about trying to find homes for data that would otherwise be perhaps putting social or technical strain on Wikidata.
Thanks so much, Tom. I think that's an excellent question, Bernard. I basically had the same question in my head, and I feel like what I actually really want is a 2-hour podium discussion on federation, yay. And I know there are 2 more questions in the room, but we really have to close down, so I would encourage those people to ask the questions at dinner. I do want to say we had a fantastic workshop end of last year with Tom and other folks from Wikimedia Germany on federation. And in my head, I can now imagine like my next dream is actually having one more dedicated workshop on federation, but inviting people from the Semantic MediaWiki community as well. Because I think we can get a little bit insular in our Wikibase world, and actually we're not thinking properly like, wait a minute, there's so much more data out there. And I think also sometimes in the Wikibase world, we forget a little bit about the core concepts of semantic web, where I don't feel like we have to reinvent the wheel, like federated values, okay, I don't know, I think, you know, the concept of semantic triple generally works. I think we have to bring back Wikibase and thinking about MediaWiki on that level of like, we want to be connecting triples across different resources and not being like, oh, I have to figure out how to map the thing that's in my Wikibase to this other thing. But anyway, I am super passionate about this topic. I love it. I would instigate this workshop somehow. I will put some effort to making it happen. And sorry for the others that I know you have questions, but I think we really should wrap up for the move on to the dinner.
Well,
Tim, any other announcements? No? Okay.
So.
Ooh, cake. Oh my God.
Yeah,
okay.
So I think I left this poor thing on Tim and said, is it okay if we take over downstairs to make cake? But yeah, if you want some cake, there'll be cake downstairs, and while you're queuing for cake, you could maybe ask me all these questions while other people get some with it.
That's an excellent suggestion. I think we should like close the live stream because people might start getting jealous. So, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much again, and let's have some cake.